Hello everybody! Today the theme of our lection is the World Trade Organization. Part 2. Structure and Main Principles. The World Trade Organization is run by its members' governments. All major decisions are made by the membership as a whole, either by ministers who meet at least once every 2 years, or by their ambassadors or delegates who meet regularly in Geneva. Decisions are normally taken by consensus. In this respect, the WTO is different from some other international organizations such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. In the World Trade Organization, power is not delegated to a board of directors or the organization's head. When the WTO rules impose disciplines on countries' policies, that is the outcome of negotiations among WTO members. The rules are enforced by the members themselves under agreed procedure that they negotiated, including the possibility of trade sanctions. But those sanctions are imposed by member countries and are authorized by the membership as a whole. Reaching decisions by consensus among some 150 members can be difficult. Its main advantage is that decisions made this way are more acceptable to all members. And despite the difficulty, some remarkable agreements have been reached. Nevertheless, proposals for the creation of a smaller executive body, perhaps like a board of directors each representing different groups of countries, are heard periodically. But for now, the WTO is a member-driven, consensus-based organization. The World Trade Organization's top-level decision-making body is the Ministerial Conference, which meets at least once every 2 years. It brings together all members of the WTO, all of which are countries or customs unions. The Ministerial Conference can take decisions on all matters under any of the multilateral trade agreements. The day-to-day work in between the ministerial conferences is handled by 3 bodies: the General Council, the Dispute Settlement Body, and the Trade Policy Review Body. All 3 are in fact the same. The agreement established the WTO states they are all the General Council, although they meet under different terms of reference. Again, all 3 consist of all World Trade Organization members. They report to the Ministerial Conference. The General Council acts on behalf of the Ministerial Conference on all WTO affairs. It meets at the Dispute Settlement Body and the Trade Policy Review Body to oversee procedures for settling disputes between members and to analyze members' trade policies. At the next level, the Goods Council, Services Council, and the Intellectual Property (TRIPS) Council report to the General Council. Numerous specialized committees, working groups, and working parties deal with the individual agreements and other areas such as the environment, development, membership applications, and regional trade agreements. The World Trade Organization Secretariat, based in Geneva, has around 640 staff and is headed by a Director General. Its annual budget is roughly 197 million Swiss francs. It doesn't have branch offices outside Geneva. Since decisions are taken by the members themselves, the Secretariat doesn't have the decision-making role that other international bureaucracies are given. The Secretariat's main duties are to supply technical support for the various councils and committees and the Ministerial Conference, to provide technical assistance for developing countries, to analyze world trade, and to explain WTO affairs to the public and media. The Secretariat also provides some forms of legal assistance in the dispute settlement process and advises governments wishing to become members of the WTO. The World Trade Organization agreements cover goods, services, and intellectual property. These agreements are often called the WTO's trade rules, and the WTO is often described as rules-based, a system based on rules. But it's important to remember that the rules are actually agreements that governments negotiated. GATT is now the World Trade Organization's principal rule book for trade in goods. The Uruguay Round also created new rules for dealing with trade in services, relevant aspects of intellectual property, dispute settlement, and trade policy reviews. The complete set runs to some 30,000 pages, consisting of about 30 agreements and separate commitments called schedules, made by individual members in specific areas such as lower customs duty rates and services market opening. Since 1995, the updated GATT has become the World Trade Organization's umbrella agreement for trade in goods. It has annexes dealing with the specific sectors such as agriculture and textiles, and with specific issues such as state trading, product standards, subsidies, and actions taken against dumping. Banks, insurance firms, telecommunications companies, tour operators, hotel chains, and transport companies looking to do business abroad can now enjoy the same principles of freer and fairer trade that originally only applied to trade in goods. These principles appear in the new General Agreement on Trade in Services, GATS. WTO members have also made individual commitments under GATS, stating which of their services sectors they are willing to open to foreign competition, and how open those markets are. The WTO's Intellectual Property Agreement amounts to rules for trade and investments in ideas and creativity. The rules state how copyrights, patents, trademarks, geographical names used to identify products, industrial designs, integrated circuit layout designs, and undisclosed information such as the trade secrets, so intellectual property, should be protected when trade is involved. The WTO's procedure for resolving trade quarrels under the dispute settlement understanding is vital for enforcing the rules and therefore for ensuring that trade flows smoothly. Countries bring disputes to the WTO if they think their rights under the agreements are being infringed. Judgments by specially appointed independent experts are based on interpretation of the agreements and individual countries' commitments. The system encourages countries to settle their differences through consultations. Failing that, they can follow a carefully mapped out stage-by-stage procedure that includes the possibility of a ruling by a panel of experts and the chance to appeal the ruling on legal grounds. Confidence in the system is borne out by the number of cases brought to the WTO, around 300 cases in 8 years compared to the 300 disputes dealt with during the entire life of GATT, 1947–1994. The trade policy review mechanism's purpose is to improve transparency, to create a greater understanding of the policy that countries are adopting, and to assess their impact. Many members also see the reviews as constructive feedback on their policies. All World Trade Organization members must undergo periodic scrutiny, each review containing reports by the country concerned and the WTO Secretariat. For the most part, all World Trade Organization members subscribe to all WTO agreements. After the Uruguay Round, however, there remained agreements originally negotiated in the Tokyo Round, which had a narrower group of signatories, and are known as plurilateral agreements. All other Tokyo Round agreements became multilateral obligations, that is, obligations for all WTO members, when the World Trade Organization was established in 1995. The Agreement on Trade in Civil Aircraft entered into force on the 1st of January 1980. It now has 32 signatories. The agreements eliminates import duties on all aircrafts other than military aircraft, as well as on all other products covered by the agreement, civil aircraft engines or their parts and components, all components and the sub-assemblies of civil aircraft, and flight simulators and their parts and components. It contains disciplines on government-directed procurement of civil aircraft and inducement to purchase, as well as on government financial support to the civil aircraft sector. In most countries, the government and the agencies and controls are together the biggest purchasers of goods of all kinds, ranging from basic commodities to high-technology equipment. They also buy large amounts of services and construction services such as telecommunications, roads, airports and power stations and so on. Having in place a sound public procurement system based on principles of transparency, integrity and competition is vital in order to maximize the benefit arising from the procurement for citizens and businesses alike. At the same time, the political pressure to favor domestic suppliers over their foreign competitors can be very strong. An agreement on government procurement was first negotiated during the Tokyo Round and entered into force on the 1st of January 1981. Its purpose is to open up as much of this business as possible to international competition. It is designed to make laws, regulations, procedures and practices regarding government procurements more transparent and to ensure they do not discriminate against foreign products or supplies. During the Uruguay round and later in parallel with the Doha round, the agreement was revised twice through negotiations among its signatories. Its latest version came into force on the 6th of April 2014. At present, the agreement has 19 parties comprising 47 WTO members. Another 31 WTO members participate in the GPA's committee and as observers. Out of these, 10 members are in the process of ascending to the agreement. The WTO agreements are lengthy and complex because they are legal texts covering a wide range of activities. They deal with agriculture, textiles and clothing, banking, telecommunications, government purchases, industrial standards and product safety, food, sanitation regulations, intellectual property and much more. But a number of simple fundamental principles run throughout all these documents. These principles are the foundation of the multilateral trading systems. Under the WTO agreements, countries cannot normally discriminate between their trading partners. Grant someone a special favor, such as a lower customs duty rate for one of their products, and you have to do the same for all other WTO members. Some exceptions are allowed. For example, countries can set up a free trade agreement that applies only to goods traded within the group, discriminating against goods from outside. Or they can give developing countries special access to their markets. Or a country can raise barriers against products that are considered to be traded unfairly from specific countries. And in services, countries are allowed in limited circumstances to discriminate. But the agreements only permit these exceptions under strict conditions. In general, MFN means that every time a country lowers trade barriers or opens up a market, it has to do so for the same goods or services from all its trading partners, whether rich or poor, weak or strong. National treatment only applies once a product, service or item of intellectual property has entered the market. Therefore, changing customs duty on an import is not a violation of national treatment, even if locally produced products are not charged an equivalent tax. Lowering trade barriers is one of the most obvious means of encouraging trade. The barriers concerned include customs duties or tariffs and measures such as import bans or quotas that restrict quantities selectively. From time to time, other issues such as red tape and exchange rate policies have also been discussed. Opening markets can be beneficial, but it also requires adjustments. The WTO agreements allow countries to introduce changes gradually through progressive liberalization. Developing countries are usually given longer to fulfill their obligations. Sometimes, promising not to raise a trade barrier can be as important as lowering one, because the promise gives businesses a clear view of their future opportunities. With stability and predictability, investment is encouraged, jobs are created, and consumers can fully enjoy the benefits of competition, choice, and lower prices. The multilateral trading system is an attempt by governments to make the business environment stable and predictable. The system tries to improve predictability and stability in other ways as well. One way is to discourage the use of quotas and other measures used to set limits on quantities of imports. Administering quotas can lead to more red tape and accusations of unfair play. Another is to make countries' trade rules as clear and public, transparent as possible. Many WTO agreements require governments to disclose their policies and practices publicly within the country or by notifying the WTO. The regular surveillance of national trade policies through the Trade Policy Review Mechanism provides a further means of encouraging transparency both domestically and at the multilateral level. The WTO is sometimes described as a free trade institution, but that is not entirely accurate. The system does allow tariffs and, in limited circumstances, other forms of protection. More accurately, it is a system of rules dedicated to open, fair, and undistorted competition. The rules on non-discrimination, most favored nation, or national treatment are designed to secure fair conditions of trade. So too are those of dumping, exporting at below cost to gain market share, and subsidies. The issues are complex, and the rules try to establish what is fair or unfair, and how governments can respond, in particular by charging additional import duties calculated to compensate for damage caused by unfair trade. The WTO system contributes to development. On the other hand, developing countries need flexibility in the time they take to implement the system's agreements. And the agreements themselves inherit the earlier provisions of GATT that allow for special assistance and trade concessions for developing countries. At the end of the Uruguay round, developing countries were prepared to take on most of the obligations that are required of developed countries. But the agreements did give them transition periods to adjust to the more unfamiliar and perhaps difficult WTO provisions, particularly so for the poorest, least developed countries. The current Doha Development Agenda includes developing countries' concerns about the difficulties they face in implementing the Uruguay Round agreements. The WTO launched the current round of negotiations, the Doha Development Round, at the fourth Ministerial Conference in Doha, Qatar, in November 2001. This was to be an ambitious effort to make globalization more inclusive and help the world's poor, particularly by slashing barriers and subsidies in farming. The initial agenda comprised both further trade liberalization and new rule-making, underpinned by commitments to strengthen substantial assistance to developing countries. The work program lists 21 subjects in which the original deadline of the 1st of January 2005 was missed, and the round is still incomplete. The conflict between free trade on industrial goods and services, but retention of protectionism on farm subsidies to domestic agricultural sector, requested by developed countries, and the substantiation of fair trade on agricultural products, requested by developing countries, remain the major obstacles. This impasse has made it impossible to launch new WTO negotiations beyond the Doha Development Round. As a result, there have been an increasing number of bilateral free trade agreements between governments. This is the end of the second part of our lection about the World Trade Organization. Thank you for your attention.